One of my favorite things to talk about when discussing all-time great talents and contrasting those talents to other all-time great talents is talking about what those players' peaks were. Who had one of the best seasons ever? Like, screw MJ versus LeBron as an overall discussion. Let's just talk about 2013 LeBron versus 93 Jordan as an example. There are plenty of great peaks worthy of coverage, and a lot of them for players that are often ranked in the top 10 of all time. But one player who is a little outside of that conversation that I think arguably did have a top 10 peak of all time is Kevin Garnett. Frankly, I think this peak is pretty damn underrated by your average NBA fan. Let's talk about it. Before I get into today's video, I want to talk about our sponsor, Factor. If you're anything like me, aka a 20-something dude who has no idea what he's doing most of the time, you probably have a pretty erratic diet. Generally speaking, for myself, food comes in and out of my life like a chaotic, confusing storm I have no control over, which makes eating consistently and eating healthy not an easy task. I've been trying to be less of a food goblin and actually, be an adult. And luckily, today's sponsor Factor helps with that quite a bit. Factor makes your nutrition goals easier by delivering fresh, never frozen meals right to your door. I know the health benefits are what might stand out to you initially, but eating on a consistent schedule is a huge help for your body as well. And if you have a hectic schedule, being able to prepare something quickly like you can with Factor really helps. Only 2 minutes in the microwave and your meal is ready. Another thing that's great with Factor is that it's very customizable. You can specify options to your dietary restrictions. There are vegan options, calorie smart options if you're trying to lose weight, keto options if you're trying to avoid carbs like the plague. And for me, I went with the protein plus option because I'm a carnivore, I guess. Head to factor75.com or use the link in the description and use my code RustyBuckets50 to get 50% off of your first box. Again, that is code RustyBuckets50 to get 50% off of your first Factor box. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video. The circumstances around Kevin Garnett and his career early on were not really that brought a lot of attention and shine on him. The team around him was so consistently awful in Minnesota that he was not able to get a lot of success in the win column, both in the regular season and the postseason. And then he went to Boston, where he obviously won his first and only championship. But he obviously did not have the overwhelming impact and insane numbers that he did in Minnesota. The only time KG would get really good help, that help would be so good it overshadowed him at many points. And he more or less became a connector and play finisher on offense and focused his efforts even more so on defense, and he won DPOY as a result. His first year in Boston, he had a superstar level impact even if the numbers do not jump off the sheet at you, but overall, that version of KG on the Celtics isn't really representative of what he was as a Celtic as a whole and what many people remember him to be, which is the post-injury in year 2 in Boston KG, who was just not the same. He missed the 2009 playoffs as a result and came back just a shell of his former self. Still a good player, still an impactful player, still a winning player, but not the superstar level guy we knew him to be. And I feel like that kind of watered down idea of what KG was is one of the most common understandings of him. Not only because this was our most recent memory of him, but more importantly, there was just so much more attention on him in Boston than in Minnesota. If I had to guess, I'd say most people's idea of KG has him in a Celtics jersey. This was certainly the case for me, at least initially. Kevin Garnett was in a Celtics jersey when I became an NBA fan, so that's what I knew him to be for many years. And, well, one day I decided to educate myself on who KG was earlier in his career, watch multiple games, go through the stats, the highlights, all of that, and he ended up being one of my favorite players of all time. Now, as I said, KG KG did not have much help around him in Minnesota, which resulted in minimal team success. But there was one season where he did at least have somewhat respectable talent around him, and he also happened to pair that with the best season of his career individually. I'm of course talking about his MVP season in the 03-04 season. I said season too many times. The supporting cast I'm referring to was a 34-year-old Sam Cassell who had the first All-Star appearance of his entire career. He averaged 20 points and 7 assists and shot 40% from 3 on just 2.3 attempts per game, but you know, this is 2004, so you know, what are you gonna do? And Latrell Sprewell averaged 18 points a game, albeit on some pretty rough efficiency. There was also Wally Zerbiak, but he had dealt with injuries all year and was pretty mid as a result. Fred Hoiberg shot 44% from 3, which somewhat filled the void Wally left as a shooter. And honestly, now that I'm saying it out loud, this roster does still kind of suck. But by contrast to what Minnesota was putting around him for many years, this looked like the Monstars by contrast. Either way, Latrell and especially Cassell took pressure off of Garnett as a scorer and creator, and KG benefited a lot from having a playmaking point guard to play off of. So how good was KG this year? For starters, he averaged a career-high 24 points per game. Now I realize for many of you that might sound like an unimpressive number because you have 2023 NBA stats muddying your brain, but I want you to mind what era this is. Because in 2004, Kevin Garnett's 24.2 points per game essentially tied him for second in the NBA in points per game. Peja Stojakovic also averaged 24.2, and Tracy McGrady led the league, averaging 28 points a night. So KG this season was effectively a top 3 scorer. He led the league in rebounds, averaging 13.9, a whole rebound and a half per game more than the two guys tied in second place, those two being Tim Duncan and Ben Wallace. He averaged 2.2 blocks, which was 11th in the NBA. He averaged 1.5 steals, which was top 20 and 4th among big men, and he averaged 5 assists per game, which was the second highest average of a big man that season. He was 24th overall on assists, and every single player besides for one that was ranked above him was a guard. The only non-guard and big man that averaged more was Vlade Divac, so shout out to Vlade, I guess. Essentially, the point I am trying to arrive to here is that essentially Kevin Garnett did everything. He scored 25% of his team's points, grabbed 32% of their rebounds, made 22% of their assists, and got 32% of their stocks. The guy created most of their offense for himself and his teammates. He was one of the best shot creating big men in the history of the game. I had a post a while back when I was refreshing my memory on some peak Kevin Garnett highlights where I said that if you squint your eyes a little bit and you're looking at Kevin Garnett just playing basketball in 04, you could convince yourself you're just watching a taller Michael Jordan. Obviously, I'm not saying KG is as good as Michael Jordan would have been if he was 7 feet tall, because that probably would be the best peak of all time. I don't even know if I should use the word probably. But the way that Garnett moved, the way that he created for himself, and frankly, the fact that they were both bald and had a left elbow band, you know, the vibe was similar. You get it. The mid-range jumper in particular for KG is not appreciated enough as one of the best jump shots we've ever seen from a big man. This season in particular, KG shot a higher percentage from mid-range on higher volume than Dirk Nowitzki, just to give you an idea of how knocked down he was. He got these shots out of pick and pops, or he would hit them out of the post or face up, and often just pulling up off of the dribble. His handle in general is something that I think is really interesting because up until, you know, the more modern stretch of NBA history, the idea of a big man dribbling as much as KG did was essentially viewed as witchcraft and a 1 in a million thing. Well, I guess guess Kevin Garnett was 1 in a million, because here he was doing it and absolutely killing it as a ball handler at 7 feet tall. One of his biggest plays against the Kings in the playoff run that we're going to go over was him crossing over Chris Webber and throwing down a dunk. This handle also often allows him to set up his teammates. Yes, he got a lot of assists just facilitating out of the high and low post, but he'd often bring the ball up the floor himself and find shooters on sets, or just drive inside, collapse the defense and kick it out, or just make a well-timed dump-off pass to the other big men on the floor because it was 2004. The entire offense was built around his ability to create on the perimeter as a big man, as well as space the floor, because back then being a big man and shooting mid-range shots meant you were, spacing the floor. A stretch big, taking mid-range shots only. Now, for everything that I have said positively about Kevin Garnett's offense here, I certainly don't believe he had like a top 10 offensive peak or anything like that. Probably not even top 20. However, where he does have a top 10 and even I would say top 5 peak is as a defensive player. The amount of space Kevin Garnett could cover was genuinely devastating to opposing teams. Talk about versatility, man. There are multiple possessions you can find where the dude just defended the entire team. There weren't many strong defenders on this team outside of KG. He had a defensive rating of 91.5, which meant the Wolves were by far and away the best defense in the league when KG was on the floor. It's really hard to think of many individual seasons throughout league history that were more impactful. How many players have been by far and away the best defender, scorer, rebounder, and even second best playmaker on a team? As a result of this insane season, KG was of course rewarded with his only MVP award, and he would also be rewarded with the first ever non-first round exit for his time in Minnesota. In round 1 versus the Young Nuggets, the Wolves won in 5 as Garnett averaged 25, 15, and 7 with 3 stocks, including a 20-20 and 10 game in game 2. In round 2, in a 7-game series versus the Sacramento Kings, a 55-win team, he averaged 24 and 15, 4 assists and 5.1 stocks. He also hit a huge clutch shot in overtime of game 3, a desperate contested mid-range shot to put them up 3, and in game 7 he put up 32 points, 21 rebounds, 4 steals, and 4 blocks, and was just insanely dominant the whole way through. It's one of the better game 7 performances I have ever seen. I really can't adequately put into words just how dominant in every aspect of the game this performance from Garnett was. It's available on the NBA's YouTube channel, The Game in Full, so I would highly recommend, if you got nothing better else going on, to watch that game, skip around where you need to, but look at how Garnett is just all over literally everything you can be all over in basketball whenever he's on the floor. It's the perfect game to fully grasp the level of impact that Garnett had. Now finally, in the conference finals, Garnett had the misfortune of running into Kobe and Shaq, a kind of hobbled and beefing version of Kobe and Shaq, but Kobe and Shaq nevertheless. Garnett had nearly the same numbers as his regular season averages, which was fine, but to beat LA, they needed him to take it further than that, and that unfortunately did not happen, which is a shame because I honestly think a Timberwolves-Pistons final series would have been super interesting, far more than the absolute meltdown that the Lakers had. I will say Garnett did have 8 turnovers and he fouled out of game 6, so he did not go out on the highest note, but honestly, he took Minnesota further than they really had any right to go in the first place. Just an insane season, and there are very few throughout NBA history that rank higher than it. There are even some all-time great talents, people that I would put over Kevin Garnett on an all-time list, that probably didn't have a better individual season than this. And I think this year and this peak is just lost on some people simply because Boston is their idea of KG. And that's a little sad to me. But yeah, you get my point. Dude was good. Bye.